Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, and it's another edition of the MSP Initiative Live. Today, we bring a special guest on the show from Axcient, Mr. Charlie Tomeo, who is the chief revenue guru, I call it,
Right.
over there. So he's responsible for all things sales plan, sales strategy, sales team, like the whole umbrella. Why don't you give a little intro for yourself, Charlie, for people who don't know who you are?
Yeah, thanks, George. Good to see you. It's unfortunate we probably haven't seen each other in over a year at this point,
I
face
know.
to face, anyhow.
And you're only one state away too. And it's not even a
And
state. Like I could cross the bridge and be in New Jersey, but it's okay.
exactly, yeah. And normally I was used to seeing you late at night, so this being at 1 o'clock Eastern time's another odd thing. But yeah, I've been been focused on the MSP space for probably about 10 years. Ran sales for Webroot, and have been really focused on the channel. But specifically, the channel that's kind of near and dear to my heart is the MSP space.
100%. So for people who don't know what the day-to-day life of the chief sales revenue in person in charge, what does that look like? Yeah, like in an organization your size.
Well, you hope that it's not putting fires out, but in some cases it is. But for the most part, it's just really working with partners, working with the sales team, working with the leaders on my team, and really probably one of the really important things just to make sure that we're able to support and enable our partners is to work with all the cross-functional teams within Axcient. So making sure that we're all on the same page, we all understand what we need to be doing to support our partners. And that's for that, that's the most important thing for us. So,
So is there's a myth that what happens on a team with 200 is the same that happens on the team with 5. Is that true, or is that simplifying things too much?
well, I've always, taken the outlook of, and I guess just because of how I've grown into the space, I was, started out in a space as a pre-sales engineer, managed that team for a number of years, and then moved over to managing the channel and sales team. And I always believed in leading from the front. So, as you know, um, you know, I'd have no problem unpacking the boxes when we were at an event. Really didn't matter what your title was. Everyone just has a different role. So yeah, it's definitely different when it gets bigger, right? The bigger that it gets, but you really have to make sure that you're on the pulse, make sure people that that you're communicating, that people understand what we're actually doing, being able to leave yourself open for feedback, right? Because believe it or not, we don't always get things right. It doesn't matter what your role is here, whether it's frontline manager or CEO or CRO. So it's just making sure that you leave the ability for people to communicate with you when you don't think that they're that you've hit something on the mark.
So definitely a people heavy situation, no matter what size. I guess people, culture, process, right? I mean, there's a lot of acronyms, in the sales land, but I think people is a big part of the equation. So, which actually brings us into our topic for today. So let me share this out so that everybody can, not a ton of slides today, guys, right? More talking, but just to line it up, 5 key steps to set up your sales hire or hires for success. Okay. So this is perfect for people who don't have a huge sales team, who already have the plan down. This is probably better for people who are trying to grow out their sales team, or maybe hire their initial couple of cogs in the wheel to just kind of set up the blueprint. But we'll talk about all sorts of stuff, I'm sure. So Charlie, a lot of MSPs out there are owner led, right? Where that's the person that's doing the meeting and the quoting and the proposal and the sign off. Um, and there's always this glass ceiling, right? We always hear that the $1 million in revenue is the first one, like 3 million's the next one, 5 million's the next one. Generally, when you get past that $1 million mark, the owner starts to really determine that they can't do it all by themselves. They need to get out of the weeds, right? Out of the technical side, more into the business, strategy and growth side. And hiring and sales, I mean, listen, there's a lot of companies out there that pitch to MSPs, setting up their appointments for them and helping them market themselves and trying to create that pipeline for them. And I'm not saying none of those aren't viable options, but generally speaking, you grow from within, right? That's the organic way that people build. So working backwards from the outcome, right? I'm an MSP and I want to understand at the end of the year, my goal is to get to what, right? What is the plan? So let's talk about that a little bit. How do MSPs determine what they're actually capable of from a growth standpoint, right? So if I'm making $1 million in revenue today, and I say I want to make 1.5 million at the end of the year, that's the starting point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, we all do this, right? I mean, no matter what, whether you're working for an MSP, you're working on the vendor side, like you and I, where we want to figure out, what does growth look like? And I think people, I've been in positions in my career where they just throw a number out. Here's what healthy growth looks like if you're this company. And I think certainly on the vendor side, we always try to compare ourselves to somebody else. Right. So you look at somebody that's doing well and, hey, looking at their numbers, they're growing at this rate. But, I think, when you're looking at these numbers, we certainly want to have, the goals and then the stretch goals. But it's what does reality look like? If I'm doing $1 million a year, what is my overall org structure look like? Is everybody at 100% capacity? Do I have room there? Because it's simply not as easy as, let's just go sign up a bunch more customers, right? Because I think we know better than anybody is that, customer success now is paramount to everything that we do.
Right. So if you sell it and you can't service it or build it or ship it, you're going to end up flat in your face, right? Who cares about the sale? It'll churn out, right?
That's absolutely right. And I think, MSPs certainly, I mean, vendors, it's easy. There's plenty of competition out there, right? There's always somebody looking to eat your lunch, but MSPs certainly are in the same position, right? So, you need to make sure that, looking at, overall where you are, going back and hopefully you have the metrics is to look at, what did it take you to get to that million?
Mm-hmm.
And then what potentially were the obstacles? And I think, a lot of the MSPs as they're going through that evolution have leveraged some of the, the IT Nation Evolves and, the Taylor Business Groups. And, I think, even Marketopia is doing some good stuff there.
Yeah, MSP Ignite, and then there's EOS. There's a bunch of cool resources out there, both from a business coaching standpoint and then just a peer accountability group standpoint. And it's always great to hear how somebody who's already further along down the line fell into the potholes, tripped up, as they were going upstream so that you don't have to learn the hard way. But there's definitely, we always hear growing pains, glass ceilings. There's a lot of terms, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely how do you know when to hire, right? How do you know how to budget for that? But it all starts with what's a realistic goal? You said stretch goal, right? For people who don't understand that, right? Like, hey, I'm making $1 million. I'm shooting for 1.5, but maybe I could even get to 1.6 or 1.7, right? Like there's the up, kind of, hey, I'm real super positive. Maybe we can blow past our target kind of thing. But like knowing that I'm trying to get to this result, I now need to work backwards, right, in order to determine what are the building blocks that I need to fill into the Tetris, right?
Right. And that's the thing. And that's why I say like looking at the data is going to be really important because, if I've been around for 10 years and I started out, whether it's, initially doing this, maybe even a part-time thing, depending on, some of the MSPs I know, they kind of backed into this and done a great job. But if if let's say the last 5 years, my growth has been, and we can't really include the pandemic in some respects, because depending on what if you focused on a vertical, you either did really poorly in the pandemic or you actually crushed it, right? So, but if you look at even the last 5 years, if my average growth was 7%, for me to go from 1 million to 1.5, there's got to be a lot to think about. If I'm going to do that, which is fine, who are we to even say that, right? But there has to be some thought and process behind that, as opposed to just sounds like a good number.
Yeah, I mean, so let's take this from two angles. It's since we're in the middle of this thought strategy. Let's say I'm a homegrown MSP. What do I mean by that? Like, there's no outside finance here. You're not funded by a VC or PE, although we're seeing a lot of that. Let's take those guys off to the side for a second. I'm a homegrown MSP. I've been, they say best in class. I didn't make up this number, right? You can go talk to the Paul Dipples of the world, right? I'm going to quote them quasi, right? 20% growth is best in class year over year, right? So if I'm doing 1 million this year, 1.2 is good. That's where you want to be or better. And then obviously below that to call not best in class. So is it about, so for the homegrown guys, if 20% is the number to go up or down from 1.5, 1 to 1.5, and I just threw those numbers out there.
Absolutely.
That might be too big of a jump. That might be too big of a jump or a realistic expectation, unless you're trying to grow through acquisition or something like that.
Yeah, and it also could be the fact that, with not knowing all the details, if you have been surviving on referrals and haven't done anything outbound, I still probably wouldn't say we're going to, there's going to be 50% growth. Maybe the 50% is your stretch, but maybe the plan is that I know that my market's underserved, or there's specific verticals that I'm focused on that, let's say even the bigger guys aren't doing a great job of, right? That are currently managing it today. So I think that there's an opportunity there. The market's there. It's ripe for the picking. In some cases, I think we've all seen this, right? Where all of a sudden a big vendor decides, yeah, we're not going to focus on that anymore. Right. Or we're going to go direct in those channels, or, whatever the case may be. So maybe there's a bigger opportunity than we know of.
100%.
At that point, then now you're betting on, let's say, growing 25% with the stretch being 50. So now it just, you need to figure out. So now at least you have that target. So maybe the target on the million, maybe you're looking to grow, 250,000. And, depending on what you see, it's so interesting to see with, and that's the one thing I love about the MSP space, that everyone shares knowledge. So nobody is sitting there hiding their secret sauce of how they're doing it. They actually take pride in it, that they've figured something out, and then they're also willing to learn. So
there are some people still out there on what I call the castle mentality, right? Moat, alligators, leave me alone. It was interesting because there's a lot of talking heads out there. I don't need to name names for everyone that's been around for a while, who have said, at this point, if a business is needed an MSP, they have an MSP. And the reason why the industry is consolidating, so they say, is because there's no net new business to be made. However, last week, our friend Joe P from Channel E2E says that Electric.ai, for anyone that wasn't paying attention to who got money last week, got $40 million. Now they're an MSP. This is a $40 million funding raise. They have a very strong software development focus to boomerang their MSP into higher tiers of growth.
Right.
But when you read the actual press release, Electric, a New York-based MSP, said that they grew, that 70% of their growth last year in 2020, a pandemic year, was from people who had never had an MSP before, companies that had never touched an MSP, net new MSP customers. How does that happen? How, like, so like, which one is the truth in the middle, or is it really, you're only going to be able to take business from another MSP kind of thing?
Well, I think it's one of these things about the pandemic is we've accelerated a bit more of that automation, outsourcing, whatever, and obviously, to be successful in the MSP space, it's not about throwing bodies at it, right? It's about automation. So I think the pandemic has absolutely accelerated that. And I'm hearing that from MSPs when they start to talk about it, because now we just flip the whole logic on its side, right? Where, some of the things that maybe you and I, doing this long enough where, we could kind of work from anywhere because we have to, right? You're traveling all the time. But now we look at even those end customers that have had to figure out, and I'm sure you have some in your own neighborhood that have figured out, how do I work outside of what the norm would be? And so even some of these bigger, these, I guess who you wouldn't think would have been a candidate for an MSP to go in and manage. Well, now the IT guy has been working remote for a year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, and I guarantee you that they've seen if I mean, unfortunately, IT. I mean, I was on the IT side like many moons ago before getting into vendor side, and most companies view it as an expense. So I'm sure that as they're looking at this stuff and understanding that, hey, nobody's in the office anymore, we may not, most people were, that you're talking to, even some of the larger companies that I talked to, family and friends about, is they've been told, we're not even going to look at this until next year. And we're in March. So, so now we're talking about, 2022. Some of them are talking about, hey, maybe we'll come back in the fall, but we're going to be platooning, right? We're going to have an A/B week time, which I think some of the people that, the schools are back open. It's a similar thing, right? Where they've cut things down so that, exactly who's in there, when they're in there. They may be even leaving a buffer where it's, an A week and a B week. So it's not that you go in every other day and they clean the office over the weekend and the B team comes in.
Yeah.
And so
it's opened up. So people who you never targeted before as an MSP, like there's definitely we co-managed has really started to bubble up, right? Because the internal IT guys were some of the first people to go, along with marketing and a bunch of other guys, right? When people were trying to save pennies and dollars. So now those people need help that they didn't need help with before. So that's been a pretty big angle. Obviously, there's there's also, like you said, these businesses that you would never targeted, right? Maybe people who never thought they needed IT because they just walk into the same place every time and they duct tape and bubble gum, and now they're forced into maybe looking for somebody that they didn't have before, right?
no, absolutely. And you think, you look at what's been going on, and all the noise in the MSP space, for at least, last couple of years, you'd have to be, you have to have been asleep during this to not see that, there is a big push for, MSPs to focus, make sure that they're focusing on their security practice.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So that, that I think was always a bigger concern, right? If I'm going to outsource my IT and the only thing I'm going to get offered is maybe, DNS and maybe, maybe an endpoint protection. Well, I need more than that, right? If I'm a law firm, if I'm, you're doing anything that I have to, be compliant in, well, now that's not the case anymore. You look at almost every MSP is, their security stack is getting bigger and bigger.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd certainly say some of the larger ones.
Even in the last 6 months,
Yeah.
it's ballooned for sure. All right, so let's get back to the beginning bullets points here, so that we can work backwards from the sales hire conversation, right? So I'm an MSP. I've decided, after doing some homework, talking to my colleagues, talking to my peer group, talking to really smart business consultants, whoever it may be, or just maybe you're really good at forecasting, you've determined that you want to grow your business. You've determined the number that you want to grow your business by, right? So let's just
Yeah.
go let's just take the 1 million to 1.25 million, right? 20 to 25% growth as just a guesstimate example for the purpose of this exercise. Obviously it scales. So you've decided, hey, I need to either establish a sales team other than me, the owner, or I need to grow my sales team. I need to position my sales team to reach my target. So for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to assume at $1 million, there's probably not a salesperson. There's probably not a lot of sales resources yet. We're just starting from the blueprint, right? The foundation point. So if I need to grow by 200 to 225, 250,000 in reoccurring revenue on top of my million, I know what my goal is now. I know what my end game is now, right? Now, we didn't talk about, is that in co-managed? Is that in, home? Is that in traditional managed services all in? It could be a combination of things, but, we understand the number, right?
Yeah, we also have to look at, which we shouldn't downplay, especially now, is what about the cross sell or the upsell within? So if you want to add more of that security stack, right?
Yeah.
We know that, especially now it's trying times. Maybe people don't have the, the budget, but I'm seeing some noise around there where some of the people that are talking heads are talking about, hey, can we get up to $300 an endpoint managed?
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And so, so if you look at, and that's always depending on who I talk to, it's sometimes it's the industry they're focused on, the geo, but if you could go from, a certain percentage of your customers go from 150 a month to 300, so I think it's really, how do you back into that number is one of the things that we need to figure out. So we have that target, and then we have to figure out, like, what are these, what are your hires going to focus on?
Yep.
Because, if you're the owner, or if you're, one of the owners, and you've been, really successful, you know the tech, you know how to sell it, you have the relationships with all the existing partner base, you may be better off focused on going and getting people to convert from the 150 to the 300, and assume that you're going to convert a certain percentage of that. And then, the new hire, what do they have to go get? And you really have to bring it down to kind of what's your average price that you're charging, per endpoint or per device, and depending on what you're really focused on, and then backing that into the number of new accounts that person would need. So if my average account today is 20, an actual 20, 20 person company is my average. Well, what does that add up to? And, how do you kind of waterfall that out or project that out over the year? And we all know that it's never going to be, it's going to be that ramp, right, George? Just like you show here, it's absolutely going to be that ramp. So I think, those are the things that you need to focus on is, what would you want that new hire to focus on? What do you think, realistic goals would be in place? And then you have to figure out, how you going to go find these people.
Well, there, before you go, like, so obviously in sales land, there's usually base plus commission of some sort, right?
Yeah.
So like you have to be competitive with base, although, and again, whether you consider it a silver lining or not, there's a lot more people out there looking for a gig than there was a year ago. So it may be a little bit of a hirer's market than it was
right
in 2019, 2020. That being said, you gotta have a competitive base, and then you have to, from working backwards from your goal number, create, how does this person get compensated? How do we make sure that they have some skin in the game, but also have some meat on the bone so that they know that they can make money? And I think that's one of the Achilles heels in MSP land, because people come up with crazy comp plans, and the more complicated the comp plan, the harder it is to keep people in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think more importantly is doing all your homework before you hire the first person or even interview them is going to be important. Because if you look at most of the MSPs, I would guarantee you, if you said to them, do you ever use a contractor, right? So let's say, this is, I'll even, date myself using like running cable or something like that, right? Where maybe it doesn't make sense for them to have, depending on where they are, to have people in-house that go and do that.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you there's not one MSP, or certainly one that's profitable, that hires a contractor, pays them an hourly rate, and doesn't have the job for them.
No.
Right. Right. So they're already prepared, but it's not much different with the sales team, is having all these things set up and outlined beforehand, as opposed to, hey, we hired this, good person. They could have come in sales. I mean, frankly, they could have sold cars, right? Could be anything, but they could be somebody that's, really wants to, change careers, get into the space, whatever the case may be. Let's say they have all the best soft skills. You put them in place, but if you don't have something, really, um, for them to go and do, it's going to be challenging, right? So you just hired somebody, and even if you're not paying them a ton, it's still something that, you're taking a hit on. And that's always the other thing, George, as we go through this is, you have to start adding now those additional costs into your cost of doing business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how do you get, how do you keep the margins that you're used to as you're building out that team?
So JP actually chimes in. It's actually a great quote. Simon Sinek calls it technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. I don't think you can say it any better. JP, thanks for sharing that. So for a second, let's zoom out. In software vendor land, or just larger business land, the roles are generally split out, right? There's an account manager that's job is to keep touch with people, make sure they're happy, and potentially grow the business with that particular customer. There is a BDR or SDR, business development representative, sales development, somebody whose job is to go out there, warm people up, and get them into the pipeline, get the appointment set, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the actual closer, the salesperson, whose job is to have the conversation, understand the pain, hopefully give them a solution for the pain, and potentially close the deal. But in the smaller organizations, is that not now just one person? Like it's almost
that's what it comes down to, right? You talk about those three people, and then you introduce one person, right? And so I do think that, at least trying to define what they're going to focus on, in a sense, and maybe it's just, who's going to focus on managing the existing accounts, and then, upselling them on services. Maybe that's a separate job from that person that we just want hunting. We want them smiling and dialing all day. And even initially, depending on how, who you wind up hiring, they may not be in a position to really represent the offering the way that, and that's always the challenge, right? When you're talking to the technical person or the owner, they have it down. They know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking from years of experience. They have the ability to, at least hopefully ensue confidence in who they're talking to, that, hey, I've been doing this for a long time. So it's just figuring out, exactly what the scope and focus. I mean, that's the one thing that I would say, the light bulb moment for me, even in the success I've had in the channel, is focus.
okay.
When you work for a small vendor, it's no different. There's so many different aspects of channel. You could either do all of them poorly or mediocre, or you could focus on the ones that make sense for where you are. So that's the other thing is, where do you, figuring out where you're successful. I was always good. It's a little reflecting doesn't hurt anybody.
100%. Especially when there's the larger organizations have a bit more budget, can afford to give it some time to make it work. Whereas the smaller orgs may need a faster turnaround in terms of revenue. Let me go here for a second. Maybe the smaller organization is better set to have that BDR SDR role filled in order to feed the owner who's effectively the salesperson. Does that, maybe that blueprint at that size makes more sense until you get a little bit further down the line, have the owner step back and then install a dedicated salesperson. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or that person will wind up learning and then growing into that role.
There you go.
So it's absolutely the, the kind of, set them up and knock them down mentality, right? You get it, and that could be one of the things when you look at, like you said, even the owner or maybe somebody more senior that focuses on sales, are they truly focused on sales, or are they doing 5 other things?
Yeah.
Are they still the president? Are they, are they managing a bunch of people on top of it? So it's just figuring that out.
Sure. So let's do this. Let's break it out into 2 roles, right? BDR, SDR feeding, what could be the salesperson or the owner. And then let's talk about what the KPIs are for the salesperson. Not a lot of slides here, guys. So I'm just flipping in and out. So what are the KPIs for a BDR, SDR, which ultimately determine how that person gets comped? How does that package come to form?
Yeah, I think early on, it's definitely going to be the number of, calls that they're making, or touch points, whatever it is. We don't want to, I know how people love getting spammed to death, so that's not the way to go. But, unless you have specific, with us, I think it's a bit different where, as a vendor, you go to these different conferences, you get to meet a bunch of partners, and you're building out your database from there. For MSP, I would think it's going to be, a bit more challenging. So how do they go about that? Are there things that they can be doing to drive it so that this person actually knows who to call?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not just the, and depending on who you talk to, everybody's got a different methodology in this. You should be making 50 calls a day. You should, you know, you know, so many amount of demos are going to be scheduled in the week, whether it's 10, trials set up and going through those things are some of the metrics that we use. But I think for them, it's just to get them before they even figure out the metrics. It's just figuring out like, what am I going to go do? Where do I start? I'm a new person that starts, even if I know the industry, unless I'm going to go out and start looking through the virtual phone book, I'm probably going to want to, figure out, is there specific verticals I do better of others? Because then we could easily go online and we could start knocking those down. We could look at, am I covering a specific geo that I want to cover, go after, and then you're going to just want them, smiling and dialing and make sure that they know who they're looking to talk to.
Right. So it could be
Business owner, is it the office manager? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, it could be I'm based here out of Philadelphia, so I'm going to use that as an example. I'm targeting doctors' offices within a 40-mile radius of where I'm at, here in southeastern PA, Philly Metro, and I want to dial 100 doctors' offices a day with the hope that every day or two I'm booking 1 or 2 appointments.
That's right. Yeah, and that's I think you need to make it as simple as that. And we always have these call blitz days, right? Where we're getting people on the phone. The reps will do prospecting, but this is what I would. It's no different than that, right? From a prospecting standpoint, is they're out there, they're looking for them, and they're setting them up. And if those are the goals, if you put some goals in place of how many calls, but then more importantly, it's, how many meetings do we get? Or, how even if it's virtual, and pay them out on that. And I would also say, to incentivize them and put some kickers in there. If the business closed, once they get to that point, let them have some type of a rev share on top of it. So not just the KPIs, but make it so that they see, if they really do a good job, what that turns out for them. Like, that's money for them. And that's always incentivizing.
Right. So basically, there's no
Database
ceiling,
salesperson.
right? I mean, the
Yeah.
more business they book and the more closed business from those bookings, the more they make. There's not a maximum number of money to be made, right?
Yeah, you definitely want to be careful if you put anything in place with targets and accelerators and those things, because you don't want to be giving all your profit away. But as long as it's, for some type of limited scope, and maybe it's the revenue that you make once you get paid after the first 6 months or 12 months, let them own it in some respects. But it also depends on what your offering is. If, the main goal is to just sell that main offering in reference architecture, do that. But maybe if they get some other stuff out of it, great, that you're managing more than the average account could be important.
So and so for a second, and I know we talked about this pre-call, but there's this concept in MSP land that, hey, I want to sign people to like the longest possible contract ever. This is kind of something that happened in telco for a long time, right? Where you walk in and the rep signed them to a 7-year deal for their telephone service. And
Right.
you're like, 7 years? Who the hell signs a deal for 7 years? But from your perspective, the term of the agreement in your eyes from a comp standpoint is a year.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see
Really not.
how, and I know we do it on our side, but you have to get to the point where you look at, um, the margins that you're making, your profitability as a whole. And, we definitely know, even as an MSP, if they're going to go out and we're going to invest a little bit in marketing, which, is always helpful, whether it's, everything from banner ads to, even sending out some things to the local vendors, working with, some local organizations, or sponsoring things, or showing up at, when we're back in person, right? Getting a table somewhere. We want to make sure that, that you're not, if you're paying out commission like almost year after year after year on stuff you haven't even gotten paid on,
Yeah.
it's that whole, goal to profitability, right? Or to get the more margin. You can't keep on paying those same dollars commission wise every year when you already own the customer, the lifetime of the
I
customer.
agree. Well, so I know we're still finishing out how to structure the role and the comp plan and that, but there's the conversation of clawbacks, right? Like assuming the person left and or they didn't leave, right? They're still with you, they're still employed, they signed a deal, the deal never even made it to the year. Do you implement a strategy where some of that commission comes back into the equation, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think you have to have things like that in place just to make sure that you're creating the right behavior. If you don't ever get paid for it, how could you pay commission on it, right? Then it potentially, there's, unfortunately, it's either an outright bad deal, which, is not great, but it could just be the fact that, there wasn't the right amount of due diligence done when you were selling the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So they found out that they weren't getting exactly what they thought they were getting, and so they back out. Nobody's getting paid at that point.
So there needs to be a base, there needs to be a comp plan for the SDR, BDR. It's based on activity, right?
Yeah.
Number of calls that generate a number of appointments. And then if those deals close, some percentage of that closure is effectively the blueprint to the package for that role.
Yeah, and I think it's simple, because if you know that you're starting out with the 250,000 is the growth, right, and you're getting 25%. If you're backing in what you're going to get from your existing customers, right, what are you going to be able to upsell? So if it's half of that, then you've gone down and you've said, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, here's my average customer size. I need to add, let's say, 5 new customers a month.
Mm-hmm.
If you hit that 5 metric and everything else aligns, you make money.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, if kind of your average monthly, the AOV on it is the same as what you're, normally wind up getting, what the average is. Great, happy days. If you go over it, you're making some more money, right? So it's a way that you go and measure that and put that out in front of them. But
Okay. So
so you could still do everything right, make money, and nothing closes. That's always the risk.
okay, so before we quantify the package for the salesperson role, let's talk about that since you brought it up. How long do you go until you determine it's not working? Right? Like you hire somebody, 90 days. I mean, depending on the role, 90 days may not even be long enough. But in the salesperson's seat, if you didn't sell anything within the first 90 days, like you said, there's a ramp, right? It takes time to get in the seat, get comfortable, get selling. How long is too long?
I think it depends on how fast you're normally able to close these opportunities, like from historical, and then the data will build out as you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
But even on the vendor side, we've seen within 5 months, and 5 months sounds like a random arbitrary number, but you're either going to take the time and focus on building. Let's say you start at nothing, get a new territory, new person. You're going to be having those phone calls, building that pipeline out, depending on how how fast you close deals, right? From initial contact to going through the process. You should start seeing stuff by the second quarter. Now, the thing I don't know, because I've never owned an MSP, is how fast do those end customers move, and I'm vary based on probably even vertical or size, because I'm sure if it's a dentist's office, maybe they're going to move slower than somebody that's small manufacturing, where they need to get you in there quick to solve some specific problems.
Fair. Okay. So back to so we identified the BDR SDR role, what that looks like, how that package comes together. Let's turn real quick to, all right, I'm big enough that it makes sense for me, the owner, step back. I'm now starting to hire salespeople. Well, how does the salesperson's plan look different from the SDR's package?
Yeah,
Like,
but if you're looking at them as a hunter role, I mean, you're setting them up. You're probably in the first quarter, you'd put them, depending on where the business is at today, if they have existing pipeline and opportunities that they could close, you're putting them in a position where, um, they're getting a number. They have to go hit a revenue target.
so you're working backwards from this, let's call it like
Whatever your goal is.
200, 250, 300, whatever the goal is. So do you pay them a percentage less if they don't hit that number, or how do you usually comp out as these reoccurring revenue project deals close? Is it 1x of MRC? Is it based on the annualized deal value? Like what do you
Yeah,
recommend?
it's gonna be a percentage, right? It's gonna be dependent on what you're comping them at, and then what the target is, and so you'll come up with a a variable percentage that they'll go to hit, and that's going to be different depending on a bunch of things, depending on what you're actually what's the reward, right? If you're paying them really high, you're probably not going to want them to have some crazy variable where they're getting 8-10%. But it really depends on you have to take a look at again to see when do we get to the point where it's not good business, right? So you don't want to give something away, but just looking to see what for those specific roles, what you're paying them, what the targets are, what do you feel comfortable with that's going to incentivize them to go get it. And then I've seen comp plans all over the place, and I know you have as well, where if you don't hit 80%, you get nothing. Things like that, where it's it's either all or nothing. Some people pay on $1, but and then they'll put accelerators in once you hit over that 100%. So I think those are the other things to look at, is what kind of behavior are you trying to create? Because most good salespeople will figure out how to beat the comp plan.
Unless the comp plan's so diluted that you need an Excel calculator to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, I got you.
Well, that's the first thing good salespeople do, is they try to back into the number to think, well, what do I have to do to go and beat this or make it work? I guess maybe beat this isn't the right way of putting it, but definitely, how do I make it work for me? And that's the other thing is if you're only paying out on the first year, then maybe you're okay with losing money in year one. Like if you're struggling to grow, and that if you're adding to that top line, that in year two is when I'm going to get the reward. So that's the other way I think that they need to look at it is, what is the cost of the service or the goods sold, and look at the profit and determine, based on the percentage I'm giving them, what do I want? What of that profit do I want to give and pay for commission? And I think that's the way you're going to figure that out.
And then from a lot of people evaluate all of this on either a monthly or quarterly basis, even though they're paying them out potentially for the year, right? Obviously when you go to hire someone or you put out a job rec, you're like, hey, this is the range of money that you're going to be able to make if you're on target, on forecast. But then usually like that's evaluated very carefully as time goes on. What happens when you look like you're on, you're above where you're supposed to be, you're rocking and rolling, you put in these accelerators or bonuses, whatever you want to call them, as they hit these certain criteria, but then you fall short on the back end of the year and then all of a sudden it falls apart, right? Like there is a balancing act there, no?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And it's not something that you could predict. I mean, most of the time, if you put something in place and you've given, the biggest thing is you need to put the seller in a position to be successful. So if there's something wrong with the service, if the pricing, if there's anything that prevents that, that's going to create a problem. But let's just assume everything's buttoned up. And now, I'm on board, ramped, and I'm in Q2. And now every month I'm hitting my number, hitting or exceeding my number. Unless something falls off a cliff, like COVID, let's say, most of the time you see those better sellers get there. And then, do you add incentives to push them even more? Right. So
what happens if the number's too high? What if the goal is, well, we want to grow by 50%, but there's no, like maybe 50% not even in reality, right? There's no way you're going to get there. At that point, there's a problem too, no?
Oh, absolutely. You'll get people quitting. And so, you have to really look at, metrics and the data are going to be, absolutely going to be your friend. If they're making the right amount of calls, if they're having, let's say they're even hitting their targets of, hey, I signed up 5 new logos this month, just like so I hit my KPI, but it turns out that the average deal size
is too small,
was 60% of what I've been targeted with. Then you have to take a look at that. You have to make adjustments because I did my part of the bargain, but you missed somewhere, or you need to make adjustments of who I'm targeting. Maybe I need to be directed to go and, in another route, or double the amount of, logos I need to close. But
so
you need to be.
For everyone that doesn't know, right? Logos is net new customer, right? Non-transacting customer that turns into transacting customer. I know we talk lingo all the time, just to make sure everybody understands what he means by logos. So we talked about BDR, SEO. We talk about salesperson. And then obviously we talked about maybe that salesperson's a hybrided, right? Where they're seeing some of their net new dollars off of existing customers, right? Like that account manager hybrid, right? All things aside, unless these guys are really, really self-starters, there still needs to be some marketing effort in front of them in order to help them along, right? Like you can't just expect them to sit in a chair and make something out of nothing without some strategy around that, to feed the conveyor belt, the pipeline, whatever you want to call it. So like, if you go in there, you have zero marketing budget, you put these people in place, they may not be set up for success, right?
No, that's right. The other thing is that we have to remember that, we're in technology, we live in a digital age, and certainly even more so with, what's going on with the pandemic. So your website's your storefront.
Mm-hmm.
So what does your website tell me? We know that most people go out and they do their homework. I see this with, I have a teenage daughter. She'll go on, websites. I mean, and she'll look to see, if she's going to go get her nails done. What, how are they rating this place?
Mm-hmm.
What does the food look like? We do that when we travel. So why would anybody think that if I'm a, local business owner that doesn't know anything about IT, if I'm getting that phone call, I'm going to go look at what your storefront looks like, because I don't know, I'm not going to roll up to your off where your office is. And now I certainly am not rolling up.
This is true.
So what does that look like? Are you putting enough stuff out there that you're actually working with, the likes of, your existing customers that are happy? Are you, it's no different than all of us, right? Do you have customer testimonials on there from local businesses? Can you reference somebody? If I call in and say, I'm working with, Dr. Jones down the street, we actually support him. Maybe there's something that we could do to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that you have these, and so just make sure that the talk tracks where it needs to be. But certainly, going out and marketing, and George, you're the master marketer. So they should definitely be tapping you for
Yeah,
advice. But
there's definitely, now again, I said it earlier, right? There's companies out there that can help you with this if you don't want to do it on your own, but there needs to be a combination of enough content to make sure that people, as they're doing their homework on you, know what you're capable of or what you're offering. But then there also needs to be educational content, right? Maybe not a hard sales pitch, but and again, Charlie said cybersecurity is a big one, or preparing for remote working, or compliance, or just them understanding how the technology is shifting for their vertical, whatever it may be. But your hope is that all of your marketing efforts, whether it be ads, social, web, whatever, even outbound mail for that matter, it's actually working, believe it or not. They're bringing in leads that augment your appointment booker, deal getter guy, right? To qualify and set so that you can hopefully get them into a deal cycle, which ultimately then gets turned into a customer that's transacting. So there's a conveyor belt process. I struggle, and again, there's smart people out there that charge money to help you with this. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more involved, but I struggle when somebody hires a salesperson or half, BDR, SDR marketing person, and then they have no room to work. There's no funds, there's no strategy, right? And you're just dropping them into the ocean and saying, find me business. It doesn't really work out that way.
no, that's right. And you definitely need to, in light of the fact that we're not out in front of people like we would like to be, take content from the vendors that you work with.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that's the gift that keeps on giving, if you ask my 84-year-old dad about ransomware, he knows about ransomware. So even if you sent out to a bunch of local businesses, we're doing a webinar to educate you on ransomware and best practices and what you can do as a small business owner. There's a way, and it's just things like that you're giving back to the community, you're educating them, and now you're getting to understand there's more to it. I mean, some of these small businesses, depending on how small they are, like my dentist office, this is probably about a year and a half ago, I was talking to him and I said, hey, you go through PCI compliance here, right? He said, oh, absolutely. He said, I take it every year. And I said, oh, and your staff takes it as well? He says, well, no. I said, no, my staff doesn't take it. And I said, so when I leave, you're going to take my credit card. He said, well, that's silly. Why would I do that? I'm not going to take your credit card. And I said, well, then you're not PCI compliant. I said, they didn't go through the training. I said, you're putting yourself at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, who are you working with? Who's your IT? And he's like, oh, it's this guy. He kind of works out of his house.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you need to find an MSP. And, I wound up directing him. So I'm not an MSP, so it wasn't a sales pitch for me. I said, here's some MSPs. With what you have invested in your business, you can't afford to have a data breach.
Mm-hmm.
And he was stunned. And so, doing things on that, right? If I was going after doctors' offices, I probably would do something about the impacts of a data breach,
Mm-hmm.
even for small businesses. We know 65% of them go out the first 6 months after a data breach.
It's true. So I know we probably fell short on this last part, which is, all right, we've worked backwards from the numbers. We've determined how many deals we need to book. We've determined how many meetings required to book those deals. We determined how many activity or phone calls or LinkedIn messages or whatever required to get those meetings set. We understand there's a marketing effort in front of that, but there needs to be a playbook, a training set, something these people go through, unless they're the grizzly veteran, right? That just knows how to go out and sell. Sometimes it's hard because the owner that's been doing all the sales all this time before they started installing these people isn't a good teacher for some reason, right? Like they have a hard time getting the information across for these people to be successful. How do these people get their knowledge they need to get it done?
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important, George, is, you need to put that together. So if you don't have that, like you said, there's vendors out there that could put together playbooks. I certainly would be careful there. That could get pricey, but I think most of this is content that's on the internet. I would also go into if I'm an MSP, I would go into the forums that I'm in all the time and ask for what everyone else is doing. I've seen so many people sharing information. Like you said, some of them kind of hold it tight, but just understanding, what does prospecting look like if for this specific world that I'm in, and how do you do it? Because you have to point them in the right direction.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pitfalls there, and I'm just going to repeat them all, right? No marketing budget, no marketing strategy. Pitfall.
Yep.
You're not helping your activity generator with their blueprint, right? Am I targeting doctor's offices within 40 miles? Am I targeting a lawyers within 100 miles? Am I targeting whatever, right? Like you need to give them a definition of what their target is, how big, how much, ideal customer size. And then that's a pitfall. Another pitfall is there is no training. There is, you're basically just putting them in there saying, figure it out. You'll figure out what your pitch is. You'll figure out how to sell this. I can't really help you. I'm not good at this, Mr. Salesperson. Good luck. 4 is bad comp plan, right? Target's too high. There's not enough room for them to actually make money. The deals are too small, so they can't get to their target. Also, constant evaluation, right? There needs to be a feedback loop. You can't leave these people on an island and expect them to just pop out, all guns blazing and hit it perfectly. And then there's, the other pitfall I took out of this was, sometimes it's not perfect, right? The package of services, the offering itself needs to be tweaked. The pricing's a little bit off. Like there needs to be a constant kind of heartbeat on those things, right? Because there might need to be some tweaking along the way in case something is a little bit off kilter. And then lastly is sometimes there's not, there's not enough time for the recipe to bake in the oven before you pull the trigger fast, because you're like, oh, this guy's been in the seat for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and they haven't sold anything and it's not working. I need to dump them now or else I'm going to lose my shirt. There's a baking process that has to occur, right? In order for
Absolutely. And I think that's, evaluation is important. So I know we all talk about failing fast, right? So, but I don't think when we talk about fail fast, it means go scorched earth, but evaluate and look at where you need to be making the changes and how you tweak them. Because it is going to be, it's going to be a process that you're going to get to figure out, especially early on.
100%. No, this was a great session because, I mean, I feel like I've had this conversation in one form or another, always on this side, right? The vendor side,
yeah.
the software side. Like we talk about this. I feel like all day long there's a ping ponging conversation about this person, this number, and this comp plan. I don't hear a lot about this on the MSP side. I think it's just a guessing game a little bit. And I think that the blueprint was important to at least understand that it actually is the same, right? Regardless, like,
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's
different, but
maybe target. I mean, the one thing I think that is great, and I'm sure that people that have already done this and been through it, is once you get all that figured out and you get the right person, then building out a team is so much easier.
oh yeah,
right? Because now it's a train the trainer methodology where, they'll just, you could just build out from there.
100%. Charlie, I mean, we could probably go another hour on this. Everyone, I really appreciate you for jumping in here. It's a really crazy important topic, I think, because you'll never get past a certain point trying to do everything on your own. Charlie, where do people find you? Let's say they have a question. If they wanted to reach out, how do they reach out?
Sure. Just reach out to C Tomeo, Tomeo at Axcient.com.
Awesome.
More than happy to help.
Check. I'm sure he's on LinkedIn, and all that jazz. And then Axcient.com. Check out their stuff. Great company. And guys, ask for help. Don't go at it alone. So I would definitely suggest that, if you're going to do this, do the homework and we'll help point you in the right direction. It could be that we hook you up with another MSP that's willing to share, point you into an accountability group, send you to some resources. But if you do this right, it will work. But there's a little bit of baking and recipe tweaking to get it right. Charlie, I appreciate you for coming on board here.
Always good to see you, George.
Thank you very much, everyone. This session was recorded. You can go and watch this and every other podcast webinar that we've done at mspinitiative.com. You can rewind, fast forward, share it, whatever you want to do. I think this was really helpful. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. Charlie, catch you on the flip side, my friend.
All right, take care. Thanks, George. Thanks, everybody.